if things were taken on board by the central government in Ireland, it was going to be much better. But everything about the teaching of Irish language was left in the schools that were implementing the program. This was a bit unfortunate, because then what it meant is there would be nobody who would make a follow-up down the train to see what was happening correctly and what was happening wrongly, and therefore come up with the corrective measures. That was obviously going to be very difficult. Now, these schools did not consistently adhere to the program's rules for implementation. So there was variation from one school to another school. One school would be very serious about the execution of the teaching of Irish as a language. Other schools would be relaxing. That variation was very dangerous at implementation level. Additionally, educating a generation is a long process for which the League was not fully prepared. Here, it's important to mark the idea that the point of departure for teaching Irish language was to make sure that English language and Scottish are properly suffocated. But this was a generation journey. To handle or teach Irish language for a number of years, so that every child in the Irish Republic would be exposed to Irish language and then learn it forever. That was the issue. But the way it was undertaken, to leave it to be the responsibility of an individual school, that alone was a factor that weakened the whole process, the whole system. So, the League was not properly prepared in terms of how to handle the program and how to sustain its continuity. So that was a serious weakness. Now, within Ireland, there was no consensus, there was no agreement as to how Irish language would be reinstituted. Which means now, every school, every institution had its own way of instituting and handling Irish language as a subject. So this entails that there are plenty of variations. Some schools had to take Irish language on board with a lot of vigor. The others were so relaxed. This also means that whatever they were handling or they were teaching in this language would vary from one institution to another institution, because they didn't have the common consensus, the common ground, the common agreement. This was therefore a serious problem on the curriculum. Another problem on the curriculum was that there was no system assessment plan to monitor progress. The assessment systems were not cultivated to make follow-ups and provide checks and balances, because that would be the only tool to strengthen the program. So this was absent. So this was a serious weakness. Now, the other problem was that the people's desire was lacking. The people's desire, the desire to pursue Irish as a language in terms of teaching and learning, the desire was also lacking. The desire was lacking for many reasons, one of which was of what instrumental value would be Irish as a language. Because at that time, English as a language had already an instrumental value. That is for international communication, that is for education, that is for employment, etc. So this has to be considered too as a very, very important problem as well. Because without focusing on this, then people would not be encouraged to pursue studies in Irish language. The other problem is as a result of the League, it actually lost its strength. It lost its strength because people were not interested in learning and teaching Irish as a language because of its lack of instrumental values. Now, when this was looked at, the society was thinking that there is no way they would pursue studies in Irish language when they don't have the opportunities that will come by such kind of language. That was discouraging. So that was another problem. Now, as such, English remains and remained a nation's second official language. What this means is that because of the weaknesses in instituting Irish as a language in Ireland, it made people believe that English remained very, very important. And it remained a language that was second in terms of official use in the country. Of course, the first one was Irish on paper. Practically, it was not Irish. It was actually English. It is also the most spoken first language in Ireland. Instead of propagating Irish to be the most popular language for communication, what has happened is the weaknesses that were in the League failed to ensure that Irish language is properly promoted, to ensure that it is capturing more people to use it for general communication in the country. That faltered. And so, this has led to the failure to date of Ireland's attempt at Irish language. Now, the Irish language has failed to be properly updated up to this day in terms of the revitalization of the language so that it becomes prominent. That has failed. As such, English has remained prominent. Up to this day, English has remained prominent and it is there. So, one is Irish by tribe, but the language that they use is more often than not English. It's English that is on the popular side, whilst this issue of Irish language is not on the popular side. This is an example of language planning in terms of acquisition planning. Now, in conclusion, when acquisition planning processes are undertaken without proper care, the results are often bad. The results are often negative. But where acquisition planning is properly prepared and properly executed, there is a undoubted linguistic change. If Ireland was properly prepared through the league, through the Gaelic League, we should have seen that people would have shifted from English to use of Irish language. But this has failed because of poor planning and poor execution. So we have to be aware of this. One might wonder, at a local level in Africa here, if you consider the issue of acquisition planning for Swahili in Tanzania, you find that the acquisition of Swahili has been so successful. Why? The reason is very simple. The government, through the education sector and through local organizations, were very vigilant towards the construction of materials, training of teachers, and indeed preparing everything on the ground for acquisition of Swahili language. And that is why Swahili has become so popular in Tanzania, and it is being used well and efficiently. That is the result of good acquisition planning. So this is what is meant by acquisition planning in terms of language planning types. All in all, we have so far finished discussing 3 different types of language planning. We started with status planning. Then we had come to corpus planning, and finally we have ended on acquisition planning. As a language specialist and as a language planner specialist, be aware of these 3 and how they go about. It's very, very important, because if you are involved in such a program, you have to know what to do, what not to do, why do it, and so on, so that you manage the program successfully. Thank you very much for your attention. This has been a little bit a long lesson, and we are going to meet next time for further studies on the same.